Hello, my friends. Master Sommelier Peter Neptune here with an episode of my YouTube channel by special request, Oporto, port wine. So I've just shot a video on sherry, and I'm following up with this video on port wines. By the way, all of those sherries and all of these ports I got at our friend High Time Wine Cellars in Costa Mesa. Shout out to everybody there. And always great to mention High Time Wine Cellars in Costa Mesa. Port. This is a fortified wine produced in the Douro River Valley of northern Portugal. The wine is named after the town Oporto, where the wines kind of used to be shipped from. Actually, right across the river is where the actual wines are typically aged and shipped from. But the town of Oporto, I was there about 2 years ago. Beautiful, beautiful town. A lot of tourists during the summer for sure. But the name comes from that town. The wines are actually grown upriver about 2 hours up in the Douro Valley. And it's just a really steep river valley. A lot of water flowing, very steep terraces, often dynamited out of schist soil. And a number of different indigenous grapes grown like Tinto Roriz and Touriga Nacional and Tinta Barroca and Touriga Franca and Bastardo and Tinta Amarella. That's like, what? Who's ever heard of these grapes? What? But they're all grapes that are grown up here. And it's said that the Douro Valley is 4 months of winter and 8 months of hell, meaning it's hot. We were there in late September and it was 104 degrees. It was right at 40 degrees centigrade, and you're just like, oh my God. But these conditions allow for really incredible ripening of grapes, and you get a lot of you would get high natural alcohol. But what they do is, and this began back in the 17th century when they were shipping these wines to England, they would fortify the wines to make them more stable for an ocean voyage. And then they just began fortifying the wines as they were fermenting, halting the fermentation and keeping, arresting the fermentation and keeping residual sugar of unfermented sugar. So typically at around 5% alcohol, they add this aguardiente, this 77% to 88% pure clear brandy. And that kills the yeast dead and arrests the fermentation, and we have a sweet wine that's fortified at 20% alcohol. So typically, they have around 440 liters of fermenting must, and then they have 110 liters of aguardiente, and they fortify the wine. And it's really amazing, because what they do is typically they have these low stone troughs called lagars. And they tread the grapes. They get people in there, and they tread the grapes because you've got to extract as much color and tannin as possible in a few days, because again, you're fermenting and then you're going to fortify it around 5-6% alcohol. So it's quite an amazing process that they go through. We typically divide ports into ruby style and tawny style, but there is such a thing as white port. Made typically from Malvasia grapes with Rabigato and Codesa, but white grapes, fermented. You don't need to worry about foot treading them necessarily, because you don't need any color. But typically, white grapes fermented and then fortified. And typically with white port, what they do is they fortify a little bit later, so the wine's not quite as sweet. So white port styles, I don't think I'd call them dry, but they're certainly not as sweet as the ruby or tawny styles. So this is the Fonseca Sirocco white port. It's named after the warm wind which blows to the Mediterranean from North Africa, the Sirocco or the Sirocco wind. This is $15.99 at High Time. Alcohol by volume is 20%. And as you can see, it's almost an orange color. Orange wine? What? It's a really kind of medium to deep amber orange, maybe even a hint of gold in there. And on the nose, it smells like orange peel and peaches and nectarines and a little bit of honeydew melon, cantaloupe melon. It's a little bit of honey and acacia, and it's just this really melony kind of stone fruit note on the nose. Quite nice. You can smell the alcohol for sure. On the palate, yeah, see, this is a much drier style. This is off dry. They kind of call it dry. It's not dry. It's off dry. But man, it's got wood tannin, full, pretty full bodied, medium plus body. Sweetness level is off dry, acid medium, tannin medium, wood tannin chewy. Alcohol's fortified. What do we call this? Fortified high, 20%. Finish is long, body is full. And again, we get this kind of really woodsy, almost balsamic character. A lot of melon rind, honeydew melon rind, orange peel, lemon peel there. It's good wine. And here's how you really drink it. And this is what they do in Europe. This is typically an aperitif. So what you would do is put this on ice. You'd make a cocktail out of this. So you'd have a low alcohol cocktail. So you put this on ice, pour a couple ounces over ice, some nice tonic water, like Fever Tree tonic water, and then a slice of orange or lemon, or even a sprig of mint. If I remember correctly, that's what they do in Oporto. And it's a really nice cocktail because you're using a 20%, it's not a spirit, but 20% as your base. So it ends up with some tonic water and a sprig of mint being a low alcohol cocktail, and it's really not sweet at all when you add tonic water. So we'll call that a white port cocktail. I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, next up is Graham's 2018 LBV, or late bottled vintage port. Oh, the white port is $15.99 for a 750 ml. Now that is a great price for a wine to use as a cocktail base. That's awesome. This is Graham's LBV, late bottled vintage, 2018. This is $24.99 at our friend's High Time. And this is a ruby style of port. So when you look at it, you can see it's a very, very deep, almost opaque ruby color. I can't see my finger through it, but that is ruby colored for sure. Deep, deep, dark ruby. Ruby ports are made, they are aged typically anywhere between 2 and 6 years. 2 years, vintage ports have to be bottled within 2 years, and they are to be aged in the bottle. They're bottled and filtered. You age them for years and years and years and years and years, and they get better in the bottle. Late bottled vintage ports are aged in the barrel between 4 and 6 years so that they begin to develop like a vintage port would in the bottle at around 10 or 15 years. A late bottled vintage port develops in wood, mellowing out and getting, assimilating more of that aguardiente, of that fortified spirit, and becoming more mellow. So LBV ports are not only less expensive, they've been filtered so they don't throw a sediment, and they have development already, and they're not going to get any better in the bottle, but they're really great to drink now. And so I'm a big fan of the LBV style. I have vintage ports in my cellar, but you got to leave them for 20 years for them to really turn into what they can. Inexpensive ruby ports are called, there's kind of ruby, which I would probably stay away from, and then there's called reserve ruby, like Fonseca Bin 27 or Graham 6 grapes, and those are often, $14.99, and they're generally good. But the LBV style at $24.99 is typically a pretty lovely style of ruby port. So on the nose, we've got an intense perfume of liqueur, like cherry herring liqueur. Blackberry brandy, huckleberry brandy. It's really heady. This is 20% ABV, and you can just smell this kind of a chocolatey, but it's like dark to 93% cacao chocolate. There's herbs and spices. There's a little bit of black pepper. There's just this really heady, deep, dark fruit aroma. A lot of violets and these dark florals across the top as well. On the palate, That is sweet. Acid is medium, tannin is medium, intensity is pronounced, body is full. Wow, just dark cherry, sweet cherry, like those chocolate-covered cherries with liqueur in the middle. Blackberry brandy, a little bit of pepper, licorice, anise, Chinese five-spice powder. Just a lot of chewy goodness going on. A ruby port like this would be great with dark chocolate desserts, particularly traditionally served with Stilton cheese. So blue cheese and ruby port is a classic, or blue cheese and generally ruby or tawny. But I'd go dark chocolate desserts, a flourless dark chocolate cake, something, even a really dark chocolate, a tiramisu, something like that. Or go the other opposite direction and do Stilton cheese and some nuts or something. That's very good wine. Finally, Taylor Fladgate, 10-year-old tawny Porto. Tawny ports, again, come in a couple different styles. Kind of regular tawny port, it's usually a blend of white and ruby ports. Then there's, kind of what we call reserve tawny ports, which, don't have an indication of age on them. And then we have tawny ports with indication of age, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year. Progressively more expensive the longer the age. The age is an average blend. So this is an average blend of 10-year, 9-year, 11-year tawnies. 20-year, same thing, 30-year. Here's a trip. Any wine, whether it's white, rosé, or red, if it's in a cask for longer than 7 years, it starts to turn tawny colored. So tawny ports with indication of age, by law, have to be a minimum of 7 years old. So it's like, wow, things just turn tawny. That's why this LBV was bottled after 5 years. Maximum 6, because you want it to stay ruby. Here we have a tawny color. So, this wine is really garnet with kind of a tawny rim. As you get into 20-year, 30-year, 40-year tawnies, these wines get progressively more amber and tawny and brown colored. And this wine is $29.99. 10-year-old wine, average age, at $30. And so with tawny ports, we're expecting a little different thing because these wines are aging in the cask. Often the ullage isn't topped up, so the angel share is evaporating through the staves of the cask, and we have concentration of everything, concentration of sugar, concentration of the wine, as evaporation leads to concentration. And so on the nose, oh man, there's an interesting term we use called rancio, R-A-N-C-I-O. It comes from the Latin root for rancid, but with rancio, we mean controlled oxidation, like a Macallan 21, or a Cognac XO, or an Armagnac Ordage. It's this deliberate oxidation character. And you smell it, and that tawny port has that too. And it's kind of like toffee and roasted nuts and caramel, and it's just this really interesting aroma. It reminds me of aged whiskey, aged Scotch whiskey, aged cognac. And then there's this beautiful kind of red cherry and again, there's kind of a citrus peel and these kind of spice notes across the top, very floral, a lot of red florals and violet florals. It's just a beguiling, there's a great word, a haunting nose. Really, really beautiful. Reminds me of when I used to visit my grandma. I always loved, because right when you went into their house, on the bureau there was this bowl with those candied orange slices, those candied orange slices that have a little bit of chocolate on them. I think it's like even orange peel. God, those were good. I've got to make a mental note to go get those at Trader Joe's. I think they probably have them there. On the palate. That's beautiful. That is sweet. That's even sweeter than the ruby. Alcohol's fortified high, 20%. Body is full. Intensity pronounced. Finish is long. just a mouthful of wine, honey, and a pound cake, and toffee, and butterscotch, and kind of like creme brulee crust. And it's just got all this kind of chewy goodness. That's delicious. That's, this is very good wine. I'd probably call this outstanding. It's just really good. For $30, this wine would be great with milk chocolate. So I always think ruby port with dark chocolate, tawny port with more milk chocolate character. Obviously, against Stilton cheese or a blue cheese. This would be good with creme brulee. Man, I mean, it's just a lot of applications here and just a really gorgeous bottle of wine. So, a little primer there on port. Again, this would last in the refrigerator for probably two to 3 weeks. It's 20% alcohol, maybe a month. This would last, on the countertop, again, it's fortified 20%, probably 3 weeks to a month. Same with this, maybe even longer because it's got some oxidative character, rancio on purpose. So this might last a little bit longer. But these are great wines to have around for after dinner with some cheese, if you like, or with some dessert. So hopefully you enjoyed. Please tell your friends, tell your family, subscribe if you can. I'll see you next time.